Compassionate coding. Okay, those two words don't go together, but I'm going to suggest that maybe they should or could. So my name's April Wensel, and I used to live in the Bay Area. I job hopped my way around quite a few companies in the Bay Area for about 10 years, just a little under 10 years. And I worked as a software engineer and engineering leader at all kinds of companies. I worked in small startups, some larger companies. I worked in health tech, education tech, gaming, that sort of stuff. I volunteered teaching coding with groups. I went to a lot of meetups, engaged with the community. And I noticed something about the software industry that not a lot of people were saying, but I definitely picked up on it. There's a lot of suffering in and around the software industry. Or to put it more bluntly, the tech culture is kind of toxic. I'll go into a bit more detail about what I mean, but seeing this, I escaped to San Diego, so that's where I live now. And it's awesome. I took this photo, it's beautiful. So basically, you should move to San Diego, that's it. Talk is over. It's more compassionate there. No, but, so what I mean by suffering, employees are suffering. So stress and anxiety are huge problems in tech. I probably don't need to tell you about that. Burnout is a big problem that people talk about all the time. This recent survey by Tiny Bowls came out and said that only 17% of IT employees feel strongly valued at work. I know we don't like to call them IT employees here, but sometimes these surveys call them things like that. The Tech Leavers study from the KPOR Center, even more disturbing for people from underrepresented groups. Here's a quote from a Black female developer who identifies as LGBTQ, wrote, "I was treated as an other, excluded, and undervalued in my office. I was ignored. I was told I was too sensitive. I left my employer because I was being treated unfairly as a Black woman and human being." So they asked why people left tech, and that's why she left tech. So that's kind of a problem. That was interesting. Another problem is this kind of contempt culture in tech, which is that we always insult things like other libraries that we're not using, or companies that we're not working for, or languages that we're not using. And PHP is terrible, right? And this other language is so much better. And Oren Shaw named this contempt culture, and I think that really captures this problem and why people working in tech are suffering a lot. So it relates to this idea from this quote. It reminded me of this quote from Angela Duckworth's Grit, where she wrote, this is about Enron, but I think it has a lot of similarities to tech culture. She writes, demanding Enron employees proved that they were smarter than everyone else, inadvertently contributed to a narcissistic culture. Employees were both incredibly smug and driven by deep insecurity to keep showing off. It was a culture that encouraged short-term performance and discouraged long-term learning and growth. And so she was writing about Enron, but I think we see some of this in the tech industry because there's this obsession with proving that you're smart, proving that you're the smartest one in the room, right? And proving that you're more technical or you're more of a rock star or ninja or whatever. And I think that that's harming our culture in a lot of ways. So another way, another group of people that are suffering in tech are customers, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, sometimes it's just confusing user interfaces because developers don't know how to design for normal people, and they don't always value the input from designers. So accessibility is another issue. So people with disabilities can't always use the technology that we're building. Also, there's a question about whether what we're building is actually making the world any better or much, much worse. I was at a conference last week called Anxiety Tech that was about how to build for mental health because there's so many aspects of technology that are the opposite. So our customers are suffering. Communities are suffering. So even people not using our technology are suffering. So what do I mean by that? Well, one, we're designing a lot of times technology that displaces people's jobs, which is not necessarily a bad thing if those people can find other jobs, right? We don't want to just keep around old jobs for the sake of keeping around old jobs. However, we don't even talk about those people. They're not really, they don't enter into our product discussions. Like, well, what about those truck drivers? So if we're going to design, self-driving trucks to transport things, what about all those truck drivers? And what about all those motels and all of those truck stops and all of that? We don't always talk about those people and how it's going to affect them. David Byrne wrote this great piece, Eliminating the Human. And he was talking about how our use of social media and whatnot is kind of alienating people from each other. He writes, less real human interaction leads to less tolerance and understanding of difference, as well as more envy and antagonism. Social media actually increases divisions by amplifying echo effects and allowing us to live in cognitive bubbles. So in another direction, I saw this article, elite dating apps threaten to make America's wealth gap worse. So these apps where you have to apply to get in the league, things like that, whatever. And the idea was that if they're only keeping you with people who are similar to you, then it's just going to, people, that are going to breed and whatnot, and then it's just going to make this problem worse. In a more extreme case, we have hate groups on Twitter. We all know about that. And then I think this is something that always struck me in the Bay Area. Like, how many times have you walked out of your hip startup office, your belly full of snacks or the beer on tap, and you pass by a suffering, hungry, lonely person living on the street nearby? It happens all the time, and people just shut their eyes to it, and they're not paying attention. And these people are in our community suffering, and we're contributing to it, if only by not caring and doing nothing. So I think the software industry contributes to the suffering of employees, customers, and communities. And I think that all of these problems are actually symptoms of a single problem, which is just, in tech, we don't care about people. We just don't care enough about people. Now, this is important. The bottom line suffers too because of this. So here's a study from the Application Developers Alliance on why software projects fail. And all of the top ones are all stuff related to people. Communication issues, prioritization issues. Only the very last one is like a purely technical reason, which is immature dev tools and application platforms. And yet much of our discourse in tech is around building a new JavaScript framework or building a new this or that. And it's, that's not really why our projects are failing overall. They're not failing for technical reasons, but more people issues. So I know I've painted a kind of sad picture here. I promise it gets happier. So I didn't get into tech to cause suffering. That was not my motivation. I got into software to have fun solving problems and to help people. Those are what was important to me. And I think tech can definitely do that, right? It can help connect people. It can help us, teach kids, right? Or teach adults. We can use it for educational purposes. Creativity as well. It can help in the medical field. It can help save lives, literally save lives. I like this quote by Sandy Metz. She said, "Those of us whose work is to write software are incredibly lucky. We get to use our creative energy to get things done. We produce things that matter." And that's what tech can do. It definitely has the potential to do that. It just doesn't always hit the mark. So I really do think that it's possible that we can create this happy community of people who are working together to build stuff that's actually making people, improving people's lives and improving our communities. So how do we bridge that gap between the status quo that's kind of like unethical and shady and just, most like not very diverse or inclusive, all this stuff, to this kind of happier, more supportive, inclusive, useful technology? So I think the answer is compassion. Now, compassion is a term that people have a lot of kind of thoughts around. A lot of people come to compassion through religion, and I came to it through my stomach because I went vegan a couple of years ago, and among the vegan community, compassion is discussed a lot because the idea is veganism is about having compassion for all beings, right? Here's a vegan pizza I enjoyed at SurveyMonkey the other day, quite good. So compassion is the feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. That's all it is. So I think sometimes we confuse it with pity or like feeling sorry for somebody or just being like fake nice, and that's not really what compassion is. It's a more active form of empathy. So empathy is feeling what somebody else is feeling. Compassion adds this extra piece of also wanting to help alleviate suffering if that's what the person's feeling. So it's not just about being nice, like fake nice. Sometimes to be compassionate, you have to be fiercely compassionate. You have to be honest, even when it's difficult to be honest. So it's not weak. It actually requires great strength to let the suffering of the world in, to really feel that, and then to do something about it. It requires like fierce compassion. That's what I like that term because it shows that there's a power to the compassion that you feel. I also like to think of compassion as representing an optimization problem, and the goal is to minimize suffering. And that's just because of my computer science kind of way of viewing things, and that's what I really think compassion can be seen as. So in software, that means we want to minimize suffering for ourselves, our coworkers, our customers, and really humanity in general. I really do believe that compassion is the next step in the evolution of software development. So that's why I started my company, Compassionate Coding. I put these two words that don't belong together. People say, like, compassionate coding, that sounds like an oxymoron. But I don't think it needs to be. So Compassionate Coding, the company, what I do is I help technical teams incorporate compassion into their daily workflow, so into their software development processes. So this involves teaching emotional intelligence, how to do more compassionate code reviews, how to give feedback better, and how to design for the users and to care about that, and to consider your social impact of the work that you're doing. So it's really a new approach to software development. That puts the focus on the human beings. So there's research to back up the fact that compassionate business units do better. So this great book, Awakening Compassion at Work by Monica Werlein and Jane Dutton. They found that compassionate business units exhibited better financial performance, and these units realize higher employee and customer retention, which makes sense because if they're being compassionate to each other and compassionate to their customers, it seems likely that those customers and their coworkers are going to stick around. And I think that there's another benefit here, which is that if you try to make your work do good in the world, it will be more meaningful to you, and that will make you happier. So that helps with the suffering of the employees. Dan Miller wrote, "Meaningful, purposeful work always translates into value for both you and those around you." So compassion coding an oxymoron? I don't think it needs to be. But why do people say that? Well, in the 60s, IBM commissioned this firm to figure out what makes for a good programmer, and they found that programmers are crazy about puzzles, tend to like research applications and risk-taking, and don't like people. So the one that stands out to me in that, aside from the nice photo of all men, is programmers don't like people. And I think that we have been living with the legacy of this since the 60s. And I think certain big technology companies' hiring processes have also used this, and not just IBM. And I think that this is the results that we get. So here are some commit messages. Clarification for stupid users. Added UI element, clip post, so idiot users, blah, blah, blah. Being smarter for the stupid user, blah, blah, blah. So there are tons of these. You can search on GitHub and find lots of commit messages that talk about our stupid users. And then here's this headline, which just kills me. So this is pretty recent. It's from May of this year, when somebody stepped down from a Linux open source project, and this headline says, "Programmers are having a huge debate over whether they should be required to behave respectfully to each other." Like, this is just like peak tech culture right here, I think, and this is the problem right here. So the thing is that, it's great if we want to do social good. There's a lot of companies, that are making an effort to do social good. Problem is, it's not enough to do social good kind of in a bubble, and continue doing all the other toxic stuff that tech does. It's not one of those things where you offset your toxic footprints by doing a little bit of good in the world. It's like you hear sometimes about how nonprofits that are doing lofty things sometimes have the worst internal cultures, lots of infighting and things like that. So I think similarly in tech, we can't just approach just the social good side because we really have to address some of the underlying issues here. So for real change, I think we have to bring compassion to all levels. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'd like to step through the different levels that compassion can help. And it has to start with the self. So self-compassion, I think, is perhaps the most important. And it's completely overlooked in tech, where, again, because of this contempt culture and competition, ego, elitism, you're always trying to prove that you're the best, you're very hard on yourself as well. And the self-compassion says, don't beat yourself up. So if you make a mistake, if you aren't the smartest in the room by some artificial measure of that, don't beat yourself up. If you make, if you break the build or whatever, don't beat yourself up. Instead, talk to yourself as you would a friend. Or a puppy, because you might not be as nice to a friend as you are to a puppy. So I like to picture a puppy, because you can't look into those eyes and say any of these things. You wouldn't call this puppy an idiot. You wouldn't call this puppy and say, it's all your fault. And you wouldn't say, you're such a horrible puppy. But these are things we say to ourselves, right? If we mess up, we might say this. We might think these things, and they're harmful, Self-compassion is the antidote to that, where instead you remember that you're doing your best, and that's what's important. And so I think it starts from there, because a lot of the toxic behavior that happens in tech, I think, comes from the fact that people are not treating themselves well, so they're not treating others well either. And this comes from a book called The Charisma Myth, that self-compassion can help you improve your emotional state, your relationships, your life satisfaction, your ability to handle negative events, and even your immune system functioning. More on that is cited in that book. So another thing you can do is to remind yourself of past accomplishments. So if you're having some kind of failure in the moment, remember that this one moment does not define you, because you have a whole history of other things, you're going to do other things in your life, and there's just more to you than just this one moment. So I like to keep this thing called Smile Files. I like the name. And it's things that, good things that happened to me in the past. Perhaps it's something like a thank you letter someone gave me, or a sticky note from an Agile retrospective where someone liked something that I did. It helps boost you up when you're going through a tough time. And we all go through tough times. And so it's helpful to remind yourself, hey, I don't need to beat myself up during this. Everyone makes mistakes. As humans, we're all in this together. So as I mentioned, from the Agile retrospective, there's this prime directive that you're supposed to say at the beginning that basically says we're all doing our best given the circumstances. And I think we could all do well to keep that in mind about ourselves and also the people we encounter, that we're all doing our best given the circumstances. So you can think about what circumstances contributed if you did make a mistake, and it's not about making excuses, it's about understanding that there's always more going on. We're not working in a bubble. We may not have gotten enough sleep that night or whatever it may be. And then you can make a plan for the future, just like in an Agile retrospective, where the idea is you want to get better over time. And that's a more compassionate way of approaching when you feel that you've made a mistake. So we have the self covered, okay? We're going to be more compassionate towards ourselves. So then outside of that, we have our coworkers or collaborators on open source projects, perhaps. So one thing is to show empathy to your coworkers rather than trying to prove that you're right. So again, because of this competitive nature, we're always wanting to prove that they're wrong and we're right. And that's something I think we could stand to release. So also no more RTFM, okay? So I had one happy moment today when I was speaking somewhere else where somebody said, what's RTFM? And I was like, oh yes, maybe it's finally dying off. So RTFM roughly says read the manual, and people often say it when somebody's asked for help with something. And I think that's really harmful and it's not very compassionate because usually when somebody's asking for help, they're suffering in some way, and that's why they're asking for help. So if you come in with RTFM, you're not exactly expressing compassion for what the person's going through. So I think in code reviews, we can be a lot more compassionate. Here are 3 questions I like to ask before leaving a comment on a code review, like on somebody's pull request. Is it true, is it necessary, and is it kind? Now, I'll walk through what these mean in the context of a code review. So is it true? You might think, well, why would somebody write a lie like in a code review? That doesn't make sense. Well, what they do is they sometimes state their opinion as if it's fact. And that's just that's very similar to lying. Because if you say that's the wrong way to do that, that can't be proven like, true or false. That's your opinion. So that's not a fact. What is a fact is, according to this document of best practices, this would be, preferred in this case for these reasons. That's fine. But to just say, oh no, that's wrong, or that's the wrong way to do that, or stating your opinion if it's fact, that's not true. And so that's something to be avoided. Instead, back it up. Is it necessary? So there's a lot of nitpicking that goes on in code reviews. It's also not very compassionate. If it's something that really does need to change, then bring it up. But if it's something that maybe needs to be automated, then perhaps you should instead do that, something to check for style or whatnot. And then is it kind? Some code reviews get really passive-aggressive. I've been on teams where people have almost quit just over like a really nasty code review. One was so bad that we had a Halloween party and the person dressed up as like the nightmare pull request, like as his Halloween costume, so it's that bad. So I think I'm not overstating the point here, that code reviews can be very contentious on software teams. And it's definitely an area, especially in open source when you don't necessarily have the same camaraderie as people on your team, it's important to be compassionate here. So another thing as far as your coworkers, maybe listen to the non-technical people on your team and maybe even stop calling them that. I hate this term non-technical because I think it's used to dismiss people. Like, oh, well, she's not technical, so we don't need to listen to that. And I also think that, if you're, like, I have this blog post, if you can use a fork, you're technical. Because the idea is if you have any sort of skill, you're technical in some way. I mean, people that are using like Excel for stuff, they can be highly technical. Like accountants can be technical. Like, it's just, I think to use this term as like kind of a like caste sort of thing is just, we need to stop doing that. Okay, so be compassionate towards yourself, compassionate towards your collaborators. And then outside of that is tech users. So the other people that maybe are not making tech, but that are using tech. Maybe don't call users idiots, maybe. I don't know, just a thought. Maybe don't exploit their psychological vulnerabilities to make more money. Like this. I hate confirm shaming so much. So confirm shaming, if you're not aware, is when you're about to leave a website and they give you an option to like sign up or do something, or to do something terrible, like, this says sign up for our list, or no thanks, I don't want to look my best. And it's rightfully named confirm shaming. There's a whole Tumblr, confirmshaming.tumblr.com, where you can browse through for inspiration, I guess. Okay, so we express compassion for ourselves, we express compassion for our collaborators, the tech users in general. And outside of that is the global community. So like, is my facial recognition tech causing innocent people to be detained or killed? Is my work displacing workers in other industries? What can I do to help? These are questions that we should be asking. And I know from my time here that people are not asking these questions. We're, going to work and we're doing our coding heads down a lot of the time. And then, we enjoy our free snacks and our free food, and we walk and we have our headphones on and we try to ignore all the people that, are not appealing to us. And then we go home, or like maybe we go to happy hour and drink our troubles away. And then, we go back and do the next thing the next day. And maybe we order a bunch of like excessive technology toys on Amazon or something, and then so we can have like our Hue lights and our other things and like everything, because our lives are kind of have this void and we're trying to fill it with technology. Anyway, just a thought. So maybe consider, is my work improving people's lives? So not just, is it not doing harm, but is it actually improving people's lives? And this doesn't necessarily have to mean, that you're alleviating poverty or something like that. But, even just helping people get things done faster can sometimes improve their lives, right? Something can be good about that. I mean, even like, ride-sharing services, perhaps they're improving people's lives. I think the argument could be made at least. So it's kind of up to you. So what I suggest for this is to really tap into your own core values here and see if what you're doing is consistent with your core values. Because that's what really matters is my work, am I putting my time into what's consistent with what I care about? So the other thing is to proactively look for suffering. And that sounds depressing, but it can actually be really rewarding. So the idea is you look for how your work can help your community. So these are two apps that I learned about when I was doing a civic hackathon a couple years ago. One was called Concern, which was this app that would allow people to call compassionate responders to people in the Tenderloin who seemed to be on drugs and who were suffering. So rather than call police to come in, they would be volunteers that would come in and respond in a compassionate way. So I really like that. Safe Night was an app that was, it might still be around, I don't know, it was around then. And the idea was that you could donate money to help when a domestic abuse survivor needed somewhere to stay and all the shelters were full. You could donate money to help get the person a hotel room, which is pretty neat. So these are creative ideas. People saw suffering in their communities. They heard about suffering, and then they did something with technology to help alleviate that suffering. So the question is, if your work isn't making a social impact, why not? Why? You're the agent in your own life. You're controlling your choices. Like, why are you choosing to do something that's not making a positive social impact when you could choose otherwise, right? And I don't mean to shame you into doing this because, I worked on, social games. So I have, a lot to make up for in my life. So I've definitely made choices that were, not the most compassionate. So I'm definitely not trying to be judgmental here. I'm just saying that, for your own sake, it might be worth considering. How are you spending your time? Is it how you really want to be spending your time in life? Because we only have a short time here. Tim Cook from Apple said, "I'm not worried about artificial intelligence giving computers the ability to think like humans. I'm more concerned about people thinking like computers." And the interesting thing is, a lot of our technology is designed to do exactly that. We're, especially, coming from San Diego back to the Bay Area, like, wow, people do treat each other like computers. You're trying to be as efficient as possible in your interactions and exchange as few words as possible. And, it's just it's weird because in San Diego, people are slower, you've got the beach lifestyle going on, and yet they still get a lot done. There's a lot of creative startups down there. It's a really fun place to be. But don't all move to San Diego, because if everyone moves down there, it's not going to be as cool. So, but some of you maybe want to move down there if you're cool. Anyway, but I really do think that this is the danger here, is that our technology is really taking a lot of our humanity away. So is compassionate coding an oxymoron? I don't think so. I think, in fact, we could make it so that compassionate coding is redundant in that, the open source community and people building technology become so well known as being compassionate and welcoming and friendly. I mean, I think open source is potentially one of the most compassionate things, right? Because it's such a beautiful thing for people to come together and build something out of a common interest, And yes, now there's more money involved in all of this stuff, but I also think that there's something at that core that's really magical. And I think that it has a lot of issues, but I really do think that for something to get involved in, be something really amazing. And this idea of the lens of compassion can really apply to everything we do in technology, like feature prioritization. What's the most compassionate choice? And code reviews, as I mentioned. Naming variables, because really, naming variables is not for the machine. Naming variables is for people who are going to read your code, including yourself in the future. And so you want to make a compassionate choice there. Same idea with designing APIs. Rallying support for a new tool, you want to take into consideration other people's interests. how they might suffer. I was at one company, we were trying to introduce a new video tool, like for remote people to collaborate, and a lot of emotions came up because those remote people loved the video tool, the old one, and they did not like the new one. It was this huge thing. It was so many emotions involved. It was not a rational choice of like, let's look at the features and let's compare them logically. No, it was like, actually, no, this is so meaningful to me because I like these little virtual offices, whatever. So people's emotions come into play more than you might know. It's just how humans are. Interviewing candidates, mentoring new hires, even what projects you choose to work on can be guided by compassion. So I really think we can view all decisions through the lens of compassion, and that's the idea behind compassionate coding. So we're used to saying, what's the agile choice? What's the lean choice? So I would suggest we add to that mix, what's the compassionate choice? And you don't even need TM or anything like that. Compassion gets easier with practice. I recommend practicing in traffic. This works up here as much as it does in Southern California. People get annoyed in traffic, and maybe you get annoyed in lines, whatever it is. Think about what the other people are going through. Try to imagine what their life's like. And you'll probably be less annoyed, because if you think maybe that person who cut you off is trying to get home because they have a sick kid, maybe you're going to be less annoyed. This quote I love by Karen Armstrong: "If it is not tempered by compassion and empathy, reason can lead men and women into a moral void." And I think that's what we have in tech exactly right now, is we've been so obsessed with the reason side that we've completely forgotten about the fact that we're human beings. So you might be thinking, there's so much suffering in the world, and I'm just one person. How am I supposed to do compassionate coding? Well, I would leave you with this quote from a meditation garden near me in San Diego. When people speak of political, social, or international problems, they often do not realize that these conditions are nothing more than the accumulated thoughts and actions of millions of individuals. And the only way to change world conditions is to change ourselves. So we can actually have a big impact just by changing how we engage with the world. So if we make more compassionate decisions on a daily basis, that can have a ripple effect and actually change the global compassion levels to higher. So I encourage you to, with your open source contributions, with your daily work contributions, with how you discuss issues with people in the world, how you correspond with people on Twitter even, or other social media. It's a challenge there, but you can try to plant seeds of compassion wherever you go, and you never know what might come up out of that. I don't think tech's going to save the world, but people just might. So thank you very much. Here's my information. Here's some book recommendations. Thank you. Good luck.